Hey guys, my name again is Alex McGregor, and if you saw my last video where I unboxed my fantastic new camera, the one I'm shooting on right now, the Canon R5, you know I'm pretty excited about this. One of the first tests I want to do to make sure I get the most out of this camera is an ISO Invariance test. So that's what today's video is all about. ISO invariance is a property of all camera sensors, and essentially if you have perfect ISO invariance, it doesn't really matter what you set your ISO to. You can way underexpose an image that should have been shot at something like 6400 and bring up that exposure in post without introducing a lot of extra noise. Now, no camera is perfectly ISO invariant, but the modern cameras, like a lot of the Sonys and this Canon that I'm shooting on right now, are supposed to be pretty ISO invariant. So I am going to test this out by shooting some images that are properly exposed at ISO 12800, and then I'm going to drop the exposure by one full stop, drop the ISO by one full stop, and take an image at 6400, 32, 16, all the way down to ISO 100 without changing any of the other. Someone's shoveling outside, I don't know if you can hear it. Anyways, I will take all of those images without changing any of the other settings, so they'll progressively get darker by one stop. And then in Lightroom, I will match all the exposures to that properly exposed one at 12,800 and see how ISO invariant is this camera. And the purpose for doing this is primarily for shooting in low light situations like astrophotography, which I do so frequently. If you do use too high of an ISO, even though it's exposed right, you lose some dynamic range and you might clip some of those highlights. So if it's possible for me to shoot at a lower ISO, I'll retain more detail on the highlights and I will also have better colors and better dynamic range. So I'm excited. Let's get to it. Okay everybody, we're back on our computer and I got my R5 in my hands. I almost said 5D. It's still gonna take a bit to get used to saying the name of this camera properly. And I'm now shooting on the Olympus EM1 Mark III with the 17mm f1.2 lens compared to the R5 with the Sigma 50 adapted. So leave your comments down below. Let me know which camera you prefer, which looks sharper. They're both being shot in 4K at 24 frames per second, so I made the settings as similar as I could, but let me know what you think about that. Okay, let's get into the images from the ISO Invariance test on the R5. All right, here we are looking at our first image, which was shot at ISO 12,800 for a tenth of a second at f5.6. You can see there is a bit of grain, but really pretty clean considering that super high ISO. And as we go through our images, we can see that it'll get darker by a stop as we go until we're shooting all the way down here at ISO 100 and it's pretty much pitch black. But as we'll see in a second, there still is some good data trapped in this file. So in order to match all these settings, I'm going to go into the develop module. There is a way of asking Lightroom to automatically do it, but this is just a little bit cleaner for me. So each shot is going to drop the exposure by one stop. So in Lightroom, we're going to up the exposure by one stop. So here we're going to go +1. Then we're going to go to our next image, up the exposure by +2. Next image, up the exposure by +3, +4, and +5. Now 5 stops of correction is all that Lightroom allows you to do, so I brought these next two images into Photoshop in order to adjust them, and we can see that there's a good reason that Lightroom limits you to 5 stops, because once I upped it 6 stops and 7 stops, the image completely falls apart. The colors get bizarre. It's completely noisy. Like, there's nothing redeemable about that photo in any sort of way. So let's stick with looking at the images that were shot 5 stops underexposed and above and really compare those. Going back into my library, I'm selecting the one that was shot at ISO 400, holding Command and clicking on the one that was shot at 12,800, then hitting C to compare them. When you're comparing, you want to make sure that this icon is locked so that when you move one around, it moves both of them around. So I am very impressed. This image here on the left is the one that was shot at ISO 400 and increased 5 stops in Lightroom. I mean, as far as the noise goes, yeah, it's a little bit worse, but can you guys tell the difference? Pause this video anytime and really look at it, and it'd be best if you looked at it on a computer, but it's really, really good. Getting into these shadowy areas in where the firebox is, you can see that, yeah, it is a little bit noisier, but let's go ahead and compare the one that was shot at ISO 800 and at this one, once it rendered properly. It is so very close, it's almost indistinguishable, the difference. Again, in the shadows you can see a little bit, but this is being upped by 4 stops. So let's look at the one that was shot at ISO 3200 compared to the 1200. Here, and I'm really focusing on these shadows, I can't barely see a difference. I might even give the advantage to the ISO 3200 that was upped in post. Let's go back up to the dinosaur and see. Yeah, I like the ISO 3200 better. A couple of things I'm noticing is that the color is a little more accurate. This one has just kind of a blue hue to it, but this color is much more realistic for what this little dinosaur looks like. But looking at them full view or even 1:1, man, they look almost identical. So this is really interesting to me. I would say that this is indicating that R5 is a pretty ISO invariant sensor. So now that we've seen that it is possible to get really nice results, yeah, look at the color difference here. The one on the right was shot at 12,800, and you're losing some of these warmer colors in the wood grain that is really showing up nicely over here. And this is really interesting, especially for being an astrophotographer and wanting to use this camera at night. I'm always thinking I need to shoot really long exposures with my tracker in order to have lower noise images, and in the past that's been absolutely true. As a bit of a comparison, right now you're seeing an ISO Invariance test that I did with my Canon 6D, and this one is very obvious how much noisier it is at lower ISOs. So that was a very ISO variant sensor. But this modern camera that is brand new sensor, brand new imaging and processing technology, seems to be pretty ISO invariant. This is exciting. So next I'm going to be testing what settings actually are the best. We're going to go out and take some images of Orion with this lens, and I'm going to shoot them at all different settings, kind of similar to how I did this test indoors, and we'll see what settings produce the best colors, the best noise, the best detail with a tracker shooting some astro. This is exciting. I'm really looking forward to seeing what else this camera can do. Another interesting thing on this camera is it's supposed to have dual ISO. So once you get above a certain point, like extra processors kick in or something, I don't know how it works. If you know how it works, please help me out in the comments. But I will do some more research and do a new test on that. This is an exciting new world on the Canon R5. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Please, as always, give me that thumbs up. If you're watching from Facebook, Thank you very much, and if you do have a comment or question, I ask that you leave it here on YouTube. It just helps my channel grow and helps me make this content for you. So if you want to see more of my work, you can follow me on Instagram, and when the stars are out, I'll see you there.